So what are these other species? What are the species we're talking about? We're talking about the species that actually exist. We're talking about things that are real, things that are physical. And when I say things that are physical, I mean things that are in your head and exist in your dome. Not as I previously stated before, but as I previously stated before. And that from which I'm speaking of can be brought back through the words themselves. And if we're using the words themselves to bring them back, then that's a connotation upon the main source of what it's all coming from. And what it's all coming from is nothing but there. And when it's there, it's nothing but here, for me. That's for me. No one else. I don't see this in any other eyes but my own. And so since that has been said, I'm using that which is being used as a species, as they use that as a species. And that species is symbiotic. If you were able to catch the connotation of my dialogue, you would see that the symbiotic relationship between object, concept, qualia, and all of the concepts I brought together. Yeah, I use that word twice, I know, and you should never do that in a poem or a rap, but this is neither. But those things that I've used are not necessarily gonna be seen by a lot of people who view these videos. And it would take higher levels of knowledge to achieve such a data core. But at the same time, to bring that data core down, it's within each and every one of you already. It's just living within you. And as it lives within you, that concept is then destroyed. And then rebuilt, and then destroyed. And then rebuilt, and then destroyed. So this, for me, is not just my own. This ring represents every human being on this earth, for me. And not necessarily to own every human, though I claimed avarice. Every human that has been touched by what I'm saying or understands the dialogue and the philosophies from which I speak would understand what I mean by what I say. And I'm taking the qualia argument now, and I'm seeing that in my eyes, and I'm taking the word argument that I used, and I'm seeing that in my eyes, and they all seem to mesh together for me. And the way they mesh together is explained through so many words. And that's what I'm using, again, to say what is most powerful? Words. What is most used? Words. And qualia, because of the time concepts. And what else? Mathematics, because of the graphing nature. Because of the number. Because, okay, so we draw invisible lines between things. When I look at two cars, there are literally two cars in front of me. Two cars in front of me. Two cars in front of me. And these two cars in front of me are only different because they exist on different levels and different planes. And these different levels and different planes that they exist on are their own sentimental value. So their sentimental value gives them characteristic claims. So their sentimental value, there's no two objects the same, but there is two that exist. And how is that true? If every object has its own sentiment, how is it true that two objects actually exist? Well, if we look at it, it is a conceptual line that we draw between things. When I look at my room, I see a whole bunch of things, and I'm putting boxes around everything because of concepts, because of words, because of mathematics, because of qualia, because of graphing. And all these things come back together, and they are the manifestation of what we call consciousness. So if we are to ask what is consciousness, then this is probably the closest I could get at attempting what consciousness actually is. And to speak of consciousness from this platform that I'm using, then we must then say again, how did he arrive at this notion? Well, he arrived at this notion through the past. And through the past, I speak, again, of self-referential data symbiotic relationships, aka Plato onto who or him onto what. And when you use these symbiotic relationships, they combined to equal something that I think has already been created now that I think about it, through the webs of relation. And the webs of relation are thought of, I mean, I was very Hegelian at first, I was very Wittgensteinian now, and I was very Platonian at different forms. And those different forms that I was Platonian exist within qualitative, conceptual, and or ethical value. So, and even greater than that exists in the forms. So, I'm not at Plato's level by any means. I'm not claiming to be at Plato's level, because if there are such a thing as the forms, it is expressed through the cave. And in the cave, we could exercise some examples of how to expedite the cave. And we expedite the cave through all sorts of different media, all sorts of different medium, and all sorts of different, and I'm just showing support for one individual right now, but that one individual is equal to several other individuals who make symbiotic relationships, and these symbiotic relationships are given in regular connotations as well as the poetic connotations. So the poetic connotations has to say he creates a new style. It could be a qualitative style, aka a flow, or it could be a conceptual style, aka the abstract, as I quote from Jay-Z's book. And to look at it in that way brings forth more questions on what it is we're actually dealing with when we're dealing with mathematics, because sentiment and mathematics don't seem to be relational at all. But graphation and mathematics are core to each other. So when I look at an object and I'm stretching that object, is that actually graphing, or is that a qualitative base that is seen by our eyes? Or is it a conceptual base that is seen by our minds? Or is it a word base that is seen by the boxes we put around things? Or is it a form that actually every human being is expedited towards and enforced into? And so the forms might well exist by humans and not by apes, for example. Or the forms might exist to every human depending on how we place our status. And that's coming in the next video, is what is ethics, what is power, what is humiliation, what is love, what is all of these other concepts. But as I continue on to this concept, I mean, I ramble more about mathematics than anything, or more about, and that was a connotation towards a sentiment. So I don't see how those two things collided, but, and that sentiment was qualitative. So if it was qualitative and I said it was conceptual, then that is again another contradiction, but those contradictions seem to line up in my mind, and only in my mind, which is reclusive and inclusive. And as my mind is reclusive and inclusive, it is also could be used to fracture the basis of knowledge. And to fracture the basis of knowledge is to implicate new language, which I have done in the past, but I cannot reverberate. And that would be considered a private language. So that private language actually exists, in my opinion, to say the least. And I can make a private language a singular language through the medium of any sort. So when esoteric becomes exoteric, we become great. We become known. We become everything that we were before. And to become everything we were before is then again a Hegelian phenomenological thought. And that alone, I mean, I'm not even read on it, but that alone has been conceptually datified within my mind through my own perceptive analysis. So, that is the end of this discussion.